What's up, Professor?
Professor, eh?
Yeah, well, why not?
I know. Actually, I haven't called that before.
It's one of my favorite honorifics. Better
So
than
it's late for you there. I guess. Well, no. Actually, we're exactly 12 hours difference now.
yeah. I wanted to start by talking about that.
Yes.
I don't really understand how it's possible that it's light out where you are at 8:45 and it's dark where I am at 8:45. I find this very perplexing.
It's 8:45 a.m. here.
And it's 8:45 p.m. here.
Right.
How is that even possible?
Well, because what do you mean? How is it possible? I mean, the way the sun is clearly already dark there, and we're light here. Oh, wait a minute. You're making a joke here regarding the flat Earth issue, right?
No, not about the flat Earth. It's about the spherical Earth. I
Right. Yeah.
mean, that is, look, I'm one of these people who thinks the Earth is flat, but I cannot solve this problem of how it could be 8:45 here and 8:45 there, and it's dark here and it's light there. It just throws a wrench into my works.
So you're now taking the role of being a flat earther.
Aren't we all? Aren't we flat earthers all taking the role of being a flat earther?
You know what? There's a very interesting thing to share with you. This is because I'm right in the midst of, Jesus, where did I put it? Oh, God. Sorry. Yikes, it's gone. There's this remarkable, see, I'm right in the midst of doing a refilming of our school's cosmology course, and I'm doing that together with Gemini Brett, who's another individual who has been spending a lot of time with the flat earthers. All right.
Yep.
Well, in our school, I often say that we are a Neo-Ptolemaic school because basically we're using an approach that is based upon an Earth's persons on the surface of the Earth's
Mm-hmm.
connection to what we actually see in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so basically Steiner has this magnificent, no idea where that book went. Oh, here. This absolutely magnificent quote on the subject. I'm very much into the 1920s Steiner material and Breed's work, Elizabeth Breed's work. Now we must supplement natural sciences with spiritual science. Here's an example. Ptolemy's map of the heavens is usually placed next to that of Copernicus, and that the former is declared to be false. This is, however, not true. They're equally justified. Ptolemy's map is concerned with the astral plane, wherein the Earth forms the center point of the planets and the Sun is itself a planet. Copernicus's map is concerned with the physical plane, where the Sun is in the middle. All truths are relative according to time and place. Ptolemy's system will be rehabilitated in an epoch yet to come.
Right. So I ask, when I'm standing next to a moving train, how do I know that the train is not standing still and the whole rest of the world is moving underneath it?
You don't.
Well, there's ways to establish that. That's not a it's a false it's a thought experiment, right?
Yeah.
But relativism is only so relative. In other words, you pin down at a certain point, you pin down your reality. And for me, in the heliocentric model, I'm not talking about the astral plane. I'm not talking about the astral body of the sun or anything like that. I'm purely talking about how it is in a month that the moon is going to go past the sun, and the disk of the moon is going to exactly cover the disk of the sun with a little bit extra, and we know that.
Right. We do.
I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
I personally, the precision of the calculations, the ability to predict these things, I'm impressed by that. Even though it's old hat, even though you could predict an eclipse hundreds of years ago, I still think it's amazing. I think that the sunrise equation is incredible. I love the sunrise equation, and I could never just dismiss it outright without paying homage to how that is. So I think that your level of reality matters. I mean, it's one reason why, even though I'm an astrologer, I generally don't bring astrology into my investigative reporting.
I know. And
I
I
right.
appreciate that.
I may do a hybrid piece. That's special topic, right? And I may use it to guide me in the background. But I would never say, according to this chart, the PCR is not real, right? There's earthly proofs of that.
Right. Yes.
Though I do think the astrology of January 2020 was incredible. But you want to talk about the eclipse? And by the way, we're on with Daniel Giamario.
Wait a minute. I didn't know this was a live show.
Not
What the heck
live.
are you doing? Oh, okay.
We're not live.
I thought this was just us having a conversation. You
Well, we are.
rascal.
That's what it is.
You,
We're talking on
you
Zoom.
are definitely a coyote, are you not? Why do you have the Jack of Hearts up there?
You're the first person to ever notice that or say something about it.
Well,
Now,
how
the
can I
question
miss
is,
it?
why do I
How
have it
can I
there?
miss it?
Well, it seems like everyone else does, because I've easily done 100 interviews with the Jack of Hearts hanging there. But now the question is, what's it doing there?
What is it doing there? Well, I could suspect that maybe there is a whole oracular system that is based upon your, what card are you in the deck? I don't know whether you use that or not, but that like I'm the queen of clubs. So
That's a good one to be. I love the Queen of Clubs, Queen of Wands. That's
yes,
that's. I usually end up with the Princess of Discs, but if I had to pick, I'd pick Queen of Wands, Queen of Cups. But that's my website's called Planet Waves,
yes.
and it's an homage to the person who penned that phrase. The festival was over, and the boys were all planning for the ball. The cabaret was quiet, except for the drilling in the wall.
I am.
It's a
Look,
Bob Dylan song called "Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts." So
yes, 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 yes.
so I'm revealing that it's just a little homage to Bob Dylan and Jack of Hearts, quite a character.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, now I'm with you on it. But I was obviously I was trying to reference it based upon what's your card, of which I have several books of.
But oh, I know that. I know that one of those systems. It's fantastic. I think I'm the Ace of Spades in that system,
Mhm.
and it's quite a card. I forgot all about that. But it's really, I forget what the name of it is, but I thought this is very clear-headed for esoteric literature. You read the literature and you're like, this is kind of murky and astral, and then you read something else and it's like, wow, this was thought through.
Well,
The language is
there's several
clear.
different versions of it. But the one that I'm familiar with the most is that which why I related to you as coyote is the jacks are that.
Yep.
As opposed to the queens or kings. So,
Yes.
see, I had no idea that what we were doing today was actually recording the show. You're definitely a coyote.
Well, we don't
Uh,
have to, but when are we going to record it? We're going to do a pre-interview and then another interview about the interview. We could talk
no.
about.
I thought maybe it was that I was going to be on, that you wanted me on the show,
Yeah,
one of your Friday night show.
yeah,
That's all.
yeah, and it goes on the video channel. So that's why I
Got
was
it.
adding a late welcome since I didn't do the normal count in.
Okay. All right.
And on the morning, it's on the morning of March 13th where you are.
It's the morning of the 12th.
Ah, so it's the night of the 11th. That still is amazing. Isn't that just incredible?
Yeah.
How it can be two different days at the same time.
Yes. And then then you bring in the whole issue of the international dateline, and then it gets really strange. I've had times where I've gotten on a flight at about 11:30 at night, and by the time I get home, I've lost an entire day, and it's like around noon of the day after that.
But it works great the other way too when you can sometimes arrive before you took off.
Indeed. I know. Then it becomes the whole issue about what is easier on you going one direction or the other. And since I live in Asia, I'm always doing that. In fact, I'll be coming up to a flight to Atlanta in 3 weeks. And then after that, we'll be flying to Glasgow for the lunar standstill in June, the
What is the
19th.
lunar standstill?
There's the extreme moon. You know that the lunar standstill season is occurring every 19 years. Is when the north node of the moon is at 0 Aries, then you're right smack in the middle of the lunar standstill season. And the way that most astrologers relate to that is through the something called the out of bounds moon.
Hmm.
But this has a much more ancient pedigree, which was really based upon the way old stone circles were built, like particularly the one in Callanish, which I'll be making my 14th journey to in June. I was there in 1987, I was there in 2006, and many other times. So I was there at the time when the quote moon walks on the land, where basically if you're at between 58 and 59 north latitude,
Hmm.
the moon will come up at its southern extreme, and it will move right across, roll across the mountain range there that's called the Old Women of the Moors or the Kaliak. And the whole stone circle complex is oriented toward her. You know, so basically you have a sight line to her crown, you have a sight line to her pregnant belly, you have a sight line that is from the main Carolinish one, massive stone circle where the center stone only at the 19-year point, the moon will go across the center stone. And I was there in 1987 where the whole phenomena was first filmed.
So when the ascending node is on the Aries point,
Mhm.
that's when this happens.
Yes, yes. And that's when the moon will be as much as 6 degree, almost 6 degrees, depending on whether you use parallax or not, about 6 degrees from the ecliptic. So therefore, it comes, the southern extreme will walk along the land at that latitude. So there's just these large number of different sacred sites up there in that latitude area that are focusing on that. In fact, there's even an area of eastern Scotland where they have the recumbent stone circle, which is two stones and then a slab that's like an altar. And so that if you're looking at the low moon and you move a little bit, you can actually keep the moon suspended on the altar for, my gosh, an hour. You know, if you just are moving in such a way. It's quite remarkable, and I personally believe that the way they were working with that 5 or 6 thousand years ago, it was like a Neolithic Woodstock. You know, that is basically where the different tribes would come. They would basically they would meet there because at that time in matrilineal times you couldn't marry someone from your own clan, so so they would basically come from, you know, from Norway, from Sweden,
And mix
from
it
Southern
up with the
England, from Ireland, and right ceremonies and men and women meeting each other and music and trade fairs
and
and
foreign women. Ah,
yes, that's
that's
right, that's right.
but you know, my anthropology teacher, Dr. Banks, who I love every day, a little bit, said, yeah, that whole thing was really about facilitating commerce and trade between the tribes. It wasn't so much of a marriage or sexual taboo as it was intended to extend the reach of the tribe and make sure they didn't get isolated. So,
It was all of that. There was that too, but I mean, if you know anything about the way the matrilineal traditions were prior to 5,000 years ago. It was against their rules to marry someone from your own tribe. So you had to bring the man in from, it was like a reverse version of what the dowry system was, you know. So
Right.
basically, you gave the guy coming in from a different tribe a stake to let him come into your matrilineal tribe and see if he can make it there or not.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's the motivation for that he was commenting on, not the fact that they did it. You know, he agreed that it happened. So I can't quite work out the geophysics in my mind of this moon moving along the horizon. So I'd like to see that visually diagrammed out and
Yeah,
understand how that happens.
I have many sources of it. Actually,
I'd love to just see. I don't distrust it. I'm sure that it happens, and I love that the so people had this figured out a long time ago, that they weren't they were not messing around.
they
They had a
even they even had a backsite where basically there would be at the 9.5 year point when the south node when the node north node was at 0 Libra, you know, the opposite point in the whole cycle, that would be the what Alexander Thom called the you have the max, you have the maximum standstill, and you have the minor standstill, and that's on the inner track where it's 5.5 degrees on the other direction. And so they had stone circles that were built to track that, and they were able to tell from that the about the 18-month time period where the moon would be below the top of the center stone.
yeah.
And what's really interesting about 2024 and 2025 is that because it's a January, this the 0 Eris point, then you actually have both summer solstice or June solstice full moons that are there at the low part of its orbit and walks on the land. So you actually get two of them in a row.
Because of the proximity to the solstice.
Yes, yes, because it would be at the solstice new moons, full moons, that you'd have the most dramatic example of it. Although the moon in late Sag or early Capricorn, any phase is going to go below the top of the stone and will walk on the land. But it's the full moons that are very close to the horizon that are more dramatic. The one before, the one of, and what's really cool about the time period we chose to do this event again is that it's actually the full moon all within 24 hours of the actual solstice, you
Yep.
know, and that's where the moon is the lowest and it walks on the land,
I
rolls
hope. I
across
mean,
the land.
we are awash in digital equipment. I hope there's some. I'm sure there's going to be some people there with some mighty good video cameras to document this.
Well, when I was there in 1987, there was only about 30 people there,
Right.
okay, and most of them were my own group. In 2006, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. What the visitor center there is actually pushing is 2025 rather than 2024, and I hope that means there'll be less people in 2024. But we've actually booked an entire hotel for our group, so we'll be there for a week to engage with all the different the different sites. It's not just the main site, but there's actually this one site where I had a chance to do this in 1987, where if you walk at a certain pace toward another stone circle at the top of a hill, you keep the moon suspended over the body of the old woman of the Moors, who's in the shape of a woman lying on the land. And, and as you walk toward this other stone circle, and then you go up to the top of the stone circle, a hill that had started out as the pillow behind her head changed its orientation as when you get to that point, that hill becomes her pregnant belly. And so from that hill, that stone circle, the moon sets right into her belly, which is pretty stunning because the old mythic stories speak of it. And because of my friendship with a woman named Margaret Curtis, she unfortunately passed away earlier in 2023. But she was the one who actually chronicled all this. And for 40 years, she lived there and was able to see, got what the whole place was. And so, well, I think there should be a stone circle up there buried in the peat and sure enough, there would be.
Right.
You know, so we had the opportunity to confirm the old stories.
Yep.
Actually, there was I must have when I first went to that stone circle, it's like I knew I'd been there before. It was just so evocative in my own consciousness. And the first time I was there, which was in 1984, I was there on the night of Llamas in August.
Mm.
And I was there with a friend of mine. This was before they had the visitor center in, and before there was a big fence around it. And my friend and I were going to sleep in the middle of the stone circle, right, in the calendar. So we were ready to do that. It was about 11:30 at night,
Mm.
and it was around that time. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, this guy races down the entranceway into the stone circle with a knife between his teeth, and he hides behind that stone circle. And then we're looking over at a processional of women in full ceremonial garb walking down the entrance toward the center. My friend was absolutely freaked out because, of course, we were much younger at that point, and it's like, well, who did the druids sacrifice? Whoever happened to be there that night, No, but anyway, they're walking up and so I went. My friend was freaked, but I went up to the main woman, and I said, "We've completed our ceremony. Can we observe yours?" She said, "Yes," silently. So we're listening to this whole thing. This is how the whole thing started. So most of it was in Gallic, right? But every now and then we would hear this, the shining ones, the shining ones. When it was over, I went up to her, and I think she was high on something, and she said, and when the moon walks on the land at the calling of the cuckoo, the shining ones will return. And I said, well, can you teach me more? And then she said, do your own research. And then it went off. And so I did. And so I tracked all of these old stories. And then we were there in 1987, and it happened, even the cuckoo. And then I'm not making this up. And we're there a couple of hours after the moon went across the stones, and I'm there with the woman I'm doing the ceremony with, and I swear, and I now know they were balls of plasma that came down the aisle and hit me right in the chest. That's what the shining ones were. They're like balls of plasma, and it just opened our hearts, and it was just like something that resolved all kind of dualities and conflicts, by that opening.
And what about the guy with the knife in his teeth? What happened to him?
Well, that was in 1980. That was in 1984, and not the night when the plasma came. That was
Did
the
anyone
night.
disarm him? Like what he was, or did he sacrifice
I
someone,
have
or he got
no
lost,
idea.
or
He was the only male of the group, and I have absolutely no idea what his function was, quite frankly.
oh, you think this was theatrical? You don't think he was like a stalker, a killer?
It was all part of the ceremony.
I see. I missed that part.
Well,
I didn't surmise that. I was waiting to hear someone bravely tackling him and risking their life to disarm him and so forth.
No, he was part of that group of women. He was probably like a young apprentice or something, and he was playing it out in some way of hiding behind the stone with a knife. I don't know. I truly
Right.
don't. I didn't ask her about that.
And since you never saw him again, right? He may have been sacrificed.
He may have been. You never know.
Yep.
Although they left after that, we still spent the night there.
No, they don't sacrifice him there. They take him somewhere else.
Yeah, I guess so. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I had no idea I'd be telling that story here this evening.
That's really interesting. There's so much beauty in geophysics, and it never ends. I saw the transit of Venus in 2004 from Avebury Henge with the keeper of the stones there, and you got probably 1,000 people at Stonehenge, and maybe there were 50 of us at Avebury.
Right.
Maybe
well, Avery has the magic. I mean, Stonehenge at this point is a completely corrupted site.
Yeah, and it's also the Mars site. How it was explained to me was that Stonehenge was the war council chamber, as the temple of Mars, and that Avebury is the temple of the moon and the sun, because there are actually two circles there, the solar circle and the lunar circle. And I believe we did, it was a solar event, so we were focused on the solar circle. But it was a sheep pasture. It was with a bar with about like hundreds of photos of crop circles in it.
Yeah, we've had numerous gatherings there at Avebury. We avoid Stonehenge, but I've actually done sacred marriage ceremonies there in Avebury.
Hmm.
Uh, and I love the red lion. Wonderful to have a pug right there in Avebury. I
Yep.
love that place actually, and in fact, we've actually walked the processional route actually from both areas, both the male circle and the female circle. A powerful place. Our group had the Venus transit at Green Lake on the Big Island of Hawaii. That's where we had
Hmm.
our. I didn't see it until 2004, but definitely we had a special group in 2012 for that. Unfortunately, the Green Lake, where we watched that from, is no more.
It was
It
filled in and developed by condos or something.
No, it's
Right.
when they had that a couple of years ago. They had the volcanic eruption,
Ah.
and a vast amount of lava came down and evaporated the whole thing and covered it up, which is really sad because not only was Green Lake incredible, but up there was a heiau of first migration, 300 BC, first migration coming from the Tahiti area, and that's gone also. I had the great fortune of being introduced to all of that by a cultural practitioner over there.
Hmm. Well, what can you say to a volcano?
It's Madame Pele has her way over there,
Yep.
and that whole area of the island, it's a gorgeous area of the island. I lived on the Big Island many years, actually.
One of the most touching photos I ever saw on a news service of any kind was Etna was erupting in Sicily,
Hmm.
and which is my kind of ancestral territory. So I have a special love for anything Sicilian, and the only wine I really like is Sicilian wine and so forth,
Hmm.
because you get a little bit of that volcanic ash in it. And the people, there was a massive evacuation,
Hmm.
and someone had written into the window, inscribed into the dust on a car window, "We love you, Etna." Thinking that is respect.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But of course, I half of my background is also Italian.
Well,
My
yeah, Giamario, I assume that which of which
Well, my dad's side is all that, and part was Naples area, and the other part was the Giulianova area, which is parallel with Roma on the Adriatic Sea side.
Mhm.
They came over 1917, 1918.
Yep. Yeah, in that wave. And they immigrated to where?
Pardon?
Where did they immigrate to? New
Oh, they
York?
came in at Ellis Island.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there a couple of times. When you go there, you realize it's amazing any of those people even got in. That all eight of my great grandparents got in that era. All eight of them got in. And when you look at the vast number of reasons they could reject you,
Mhm.
if you were sick, if you were pregnant, if they thought you were gay, if they thought this, if they thought that, you would get an X on your thing,
Oh,
and they would,
back then they did that back then. Wow.
yeah, and
Huh.
they would send them home. And I sat there in the Great Hall and thanked my angels or whoever that they all made it in.
Well, before the COVID con happened, I was thinking, oh, maybe I can get a passport for
Mm,
Italy. But what I discovered was that my granddad, what he had to do apparently to stay and not be rejected, he had to renounce his Italian
oh
citizenship,
dear.
right? And so at that point, I realized that I had no stake in being able to get an Italian passport at that point. But that was because that was what he had to do.
Yeah.
A lot of them were planning to go back, but he actually legitimately didn't want to go back.
Yeah,
So yeah,
my great grandparents, I don't think any of them were actually naturalized.
they were. I'm sorry,
They
they
were
were.
not. I don't think they
Were
were.
not. Oh, oh, huh.
No, no. I mean, they barely even spoke English, but I don't think they were naturalized. My grandparents were all born here, though.
Hmm.
So I'm third generation, but my godmother, from whom I trace my spiritual lineage and any connection I have to the Catholic Church,
Mhm.
was she immigrated at age 7. So I consider myself kind of honorary first generation because my godmother was born in
Well, when
Sicily.
did they arrive? When did your forebears show up? Was that also the
She
same
was
time?
born in 1904, and I believe she was 7 when they came over. That would have put it around 1911 or 12.
Okay, so it was before when my grandparents.
Well, same wave, but the same
Okay.
wave. Yeah, well,
Uh-huh.
I consider that a wave that lasted for a while. Yeah.
Well, my dad grew up in New York in the 30s, and he
Huh.
was one of four brothers. He was the oldest. Two of them became mafia. In fact, one of them ended up being a mafia hitman, but he ended up deciding to not want to have anything because he was there in the 30s when, the Italians were split between whether they were Mussolini brown shirters or whether they were like Stalin, supporters. So you had the battles in the streets between the Stalinists and the Mussolini supporters, and he remembers all of that, and so, but he decided to get the hell out of it by joining the military. So he got in, he joined the military, then had no connection whatsoever with his family for a long, long period of time. And he actually went over and served. He never went in combat. He actually, I don't know if I ever told you this. He ended up during the Vietnam War actually being the logistics and procurement manager of the Vietnam War. From Fort Chapter in Hawaii. And meanwhile, I was a college radical in the late 60s, and I would be sending him all these letters telling him where I was coming,
Why?
you know. And he ended up, actually, bless his heart, he ended up, he was going to be given a generalship if he went to Saigon to run the war. But I was giving him all this background about it, and he said, "I'm retiring, son, because it's all corrupt." And he was able to see that, and so he got out of it as a regular army colonel in 1969. So I mean, I just think he was incredible for
Yeah,
doing that.
that's tremendous. Actually, I have no equivalent story I've ever heard like that. These
But
military
for a long
guys.
time, for a long time, he's really afraid that I was going to ruin his career because because I was sending him all these letters. The University of Kansas was one of the places where students were shot and killed, and where we burned down the RO, the student union building, and kicked out the military, kicked out the corporations, kicked out the sororities and fraternities.
Wait, what
That was
campus was this?
the University of Kansas in
Because
Lawrence.
at University of Buffalo, the faculty senate threw out the ROTC, the fraternities, and sports
Hmm.
in
That was in the
approximately
same year.
1970.
Yeah,
What's that?
yeah. It was the same time. Yeah.
So,
And
I arrived in Buffalo in '81, and a lot of those people were still there.
mhm,
So I missed the '60s in a sense, but I
mhm.
got to have my flame kindled by people who were there and who meant it, and who got faculty members who got arrested protesting police occupation of the Buffalo
Yeah,
campus, and
right, right, right.
so it was, and particularly my American Studies professor Michael Frisch. When he invited me over to his house and went up to the attic, and he took down from the attic what seemed then like ancient documents. They were only from 11 years earlier, but in my mind, they were like these ancient texts, and
Well, but it
that
was
was
in the
42 years.
spring of 1970. I mean, it was not long after Kent State happened. The National Guard occupied I was still living in Lawrence, Kansas, and they occupied the town.
Mhm.
And so a couple of students were actually killed that soon after that, and it wasn't too much
That's right. There were
awareness.
students. There were a few campuses where kids were shot. Buffalo was one of them. Buff State, or another SUNY Buffalo. Well, Spring '70 was it was the Nixon Cambodia speech, right? We were bombing Cambodia, and then Kent State was a reaction to that.
Yeah.
And I have had Laurel Krause on the program. She's planning to be back on the program. The sister of Alison Krause, not the country singer, but the woman who was shot, one of the 4 students shot, whose family litigated the government. And we've done the interview once. We're going to do it again. There's a lot to this.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
no accident at what happened at Kent State. So a student had a tape recorder dangling out the window of his dorm room. That would have been me. Hang the microphone out the window, and he caught on audio the National Guard, whatever commandant, ordering the troops to fire on the students, where it was set to be done with no order. It's like, oh no, they just started shooting. But soldiers don't do that, generally speaking, and they didn't. They did not do that in this case. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation with Laurel again.
Well, I also happen to have been at the moratorium, at the large Washington moratorium that happened in 1969, where there were about 500,000 of us that showed up there. That was such an incredible thing because we were driving from Kansas, and you'd be on the highway and you'd be passing cars on the way, and that's when there was that such a feeling of camaraderie, that
Mm-hmm.
we knew we were all on the same team. But that was where the tear gas happened, and that's where the group that became the plumbers. That's when Gordon Liddy's primary job there was to prevent the connection of the different aspects of that group that were there. So there was this whole like esoteric plan at stake to prevent the link up that was happening at that particular time period. And we could sense all of that when we were there. I was right on the edge of where the hundreds got tear gassed. I can't say I got tear
Well,
gassed.
I love that you've actually been to and with and involved in these things, and I have heard the legends and
Mhm.
pass on the folklore. But I did not know about that event, and it does not surprise me that Liddy was there to help divide and conquer, basically.
Indeed, and he totally was. He was on the ground floor of preventing
Yeah.
that event from. And I think that was actually part of what was happening from late '68 until the time of the moratorium, which was it's kind of like a timeline split at that point. It's basically when there was the just when the leading edge of the culture was extremely avant-garde and in the old meaning of the word progressive and idealistic and the whole thing, and then so they started dousing putting into the streets the wrong different drugs, and people are already at that point programmed, drugs are good, drugs are good. But I could see the whole thing shift by 1968. Even some of the bands that I would used to go see, you could tell when the music changed because they started doing cocaine and speed
Yeah.
rather than when it was in 65, 66, 67, which was a window of time where like all things were possible at that time period, and then it got shut down. It was purposely shut down actually,
Yeah.
and then a situation happened where the forces were split. And so I went into a time frame where a lot of us where I went into the Eastern approach, so I became involved with the Maharishi, and until I found out how ridiculous that was, I was in the inner circle and saw the shadow of that organization. And then others went in the direction of the Weather Underground, and became a radical types that were easy to demonize and wipe out. So the split happened right after that time, and when you had Woodstock, and then you had the moratorium. And
We're talking about Chiron moving into Aries in '68, and Uranus moving into Libra. So the kind of eternal Chiron Uranus opposition went from the mutable cross to the fixed to the cardinal cross. Um, And
Well, it
I,
was one of the few times where I have to go back to that a certain specific date. I don't have it in front of me right now because we just had another one of them, which was the North Node conjunct Chiron and Aries. Well, you have to go back to early 69 to have the previous time when the North Node and Chiron were conjunct in Aries.
right. Yep.
It's pretty rare, actually. In
Sure.
fact,
Well,
there,
yeah,
there was
it's on two different, very different cycles. But the conjunction is North Node conjunct Chiron. And we'll just take that back a few times.
I have the whole charts on it. That I did the research on that, and we had a whole seminar on it, and I wrote an article about it. But you have to go back way before, and there's not another one until after 2100. And I don't have that data in front of me at the moment, but 69 and earlier, just earlier this year are the two times recently.
Yeah, Feb 14, 1969.
Yeah,
You've got Chiron on smack on the Aries point.
yeah, yeah.
Holy mother of God. And then the
Mhm.
sun conjunct a powerful minor planet, Pholus, Venus, exactly conjunct Eris.
Yeah.
So those are bang on conjunctions. And then you're right in the Jupiter Uranus conjunction that led to the that was in the background of the Woodstock Festival
Right.
going on there. Yeah, this is a heck of a chart. I don't think I've ever focused in on this one.
Yeah, I place a lot of attention on the North Node alignments with all planets, and because I'm also really good friends with Dale O'Brien, we talk about Chiron all the time, and so he hadn't even been aware of this. So I did the research on this regarding the North Node Chiron thing. He has a lot to say about Chiron and Aries, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Like his own view on it, which is really interesting that I agree with, which is that
Yeah, how would you sum it up?
non-compliance, aggressive non-compliance. So rather than the fracture point or the wounding of the patriarchal Aries in war, what you do is you basically say, no, 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 we do not comply. I
Well,
thought it
show me
was,
where that's happening. I mean, I guess we haven't done the final audit of the COVID era, so I will say that I think that there was enough non-compliance in the COVID epoch to make many of their plans seem to fail. I think that even though the movement has completely gone to shit now, it's a complete mess. It's a bunch of little Faucis running around, Robert Malone and all these people. That
indeed.
in when it mattered, there was enough pushback to be noticed.
Well, the idea here would be is that it's at the point of Chiron with the North Node that the era of non-compliance becomes the option.
Okay,
Because
okay,
that's the seed point.
but in '69 we have a fragmenting movement. We have what was um, the civil rights movement into the anti-Vietnam War movement, and then suddenly there's a women's movement and a gay movement and a student movement and a back to the land movement and a new age movement and a black power movement and a Puerto Rican power movement and a
Yes.
every other damn kind of movement that you can imagine. And
Right.
suddenly the
Yeah.
whole thing, the linking the issues all stopped. And so to me, this was the point where the non-compliance was people not complying with the need to cooperate with each other.
Well, but there's the other factor at that time period, which it was at a completely different generation. I mean, it was the awakening generation as opposed to the fourth turning generation. The thing that I've actually researched a lot is with the American chart, the U.S. chart, is that ridiculous thing on the U.S. chart you can't get out of, which is Mars and Gemini squared by Neptune.
Yeah.
So even though the founding fathers were warning against a two-party system, the U.S. couldn't get out of it. So you're able to flips back and forth.
Ah,
what's
Matthew
marching
taking
on
that.
the right is now marching on the left, and you know you know what I'm talking about. I
Whose
mean,
line is that? What song is that from?
won't get fooled again.
Ah, okay. So, um, apropos of that, so I take Mars square Neptune as being kind of like kamikaze self-destructive. I think it's very cautionary of self-destructive conduct, and it's tricky to get out of.
Yes, and particularly since the time period of the Neptune opposition on the U.S. chart,
Yes.
which to me was just giving the absolute, completely confusion about, you know, who are the Reds, who are the Blues, you know, what's a Democrat, what's a Republican, what's a liberal, what's a conservative. It's basically just a mass confusion about the duality and polarity of a being lost in that delusion. There's just like two possibilities.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's interesting. Being a Pisces, I never swallowed that whole. My politics always leaned to the left, but I always found that I was better received by conservatives for some reason. I mean, I'm a pretty freaky guy. I mean, everything about me is pretty freaky. First of all, I'm quite a rebellious reporter, and I
Yeah.
have my very own sexual orientation, and I'm an artist, and I'm an astrologer, and all this. And I'm wondering why I'm more welcome among conservatives than among liberals. I even did therapy around this. I even
Yeah, but
after.
in the late 60s, it was the other way around. I mean, so basically I mean, I'm an individual that experienced in 1965, 66, 67 is, you know, like hitchhiking through the South and being picked up by rednecks that would say, are you a boy or are you a girl? I mean, I experienced those things directly. You know,
I've been
and
meaning to ask you that. By the way, I've been meaning to ask you that very question.
well, no. So I found out later. In fact, I heard this from other individuals who had the same experience. You know, they were with these two long-haired guys. You know, and they've asked the question. It says, um, uh, the answer was is you put your hand on your the guy that's the other long-haired guy and says, well, why don't you ask my sister? You know, I mean, so there's different ways to deal with that. And then with some driving through the South, they would say, what do you think of Governor Wallace?
Oh yeah, great
and
guy. But
and so
I
you
had
have
to
to say,
look. I had, but
I'm
I
not,
had to.
I'm not political, so
Yeah,
no.
yeah. But I had to figure out why being on the issues, if you don't count like what's going on today, I tick off the classic anti-war left checklist.
Mhm.
But I always wondered why conservatives like me more than liberals. I just could, and I think it's an interesting question. And now I can see the point of view motivating their conservatism. Not that I agree with them on the issues, but I understand some of their fundamental or seemingly fundamental mental precepts that
Yeah.
lead to their observation. And then during COVID, it was the conservatives who pushed back at all, and the the liberals, the anti-war, allegedly peace-loving, freedom-loving, free speech liberals who gagged themselves and injected themselves, and wanted to throw rocks at people who were objecting. And my readership largely was liberal at that time, and I've never been accused of being a liar. I mean, I think that's the one thing most people are just not going to work to call me as a liar. And then they're saying, "Oh, but you're a liar. Why nothing you said matched what I was seeing on television." Like,
Well,
golly gee, Jim Bob, you're really
yeah,
observant. How did you figure that out?
for a long time, one of the places I lived was Nevada City, Grass Valley, California.
I have
And
my Nevada City Border Patrol button upstairs. Go ahead.
And
I'll finish the story, and then I will
oh no, I
tell
mean,
you
when I
about
lived there, I
95959.
was a regular guest on 4 different KVMR radio shows, including a music show that was just fantastic. We'd have the, but it was also on the so-called conspiracy, shows, and those shows have been completely taken off. You're not allowed to
Yeah.
be on those shows anymore, and I was not there. I wasn't living there during the beginning of the COVID era, but the great majority of the people there were. I used to say, if you're going to live in California, it's absolutely the best place to live because it was the most open-minded and the most liberal in the best sense of the word. Currently, I only know 2 people still there that didn't get sucked into the con.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this warrants thoughtful reflection
Mhm,
of how that happened, how that special species of toxic tribalism
mhm,
took them over. And I had one of my first bosses as a journalist, the owner of the company where I learned the business I'm currently in, Whitaker Newsletters Incorporated, Joel Whitaker, good
mhm,
old school Republican, looked
mhm,
like it, sounded like it, good businessman. And he said, "What do you mean conservatives are lockstep? I promise you, liberals are more lockstep than conservatives." And I thought he was crazy. I thought,
mhm.
what is he fucking talking about? But it turns out that since 2018, I've been caucusing at the church picnic. I mean, I realized I had more in common with fundamentalist Christians than I
Yeah.
had in common with people who fancy themselves liberals.
That's the
So
same thing that Naomi Wolf writes about all the time. I mean, her experience with that, that she was uh, a total in line with that whole uh, liberal community. And then it's just once she figured out that the whole thing was a con, that the only people that she hangs out with now are the quote conservatives.
yeah, and I've had so many life lessons around that, and um, it's just my nature to stay open to what people think
Yeah.
and who they are, and not to just cast them off for their opinion about something. I don't quite know what that really is about, but it's definitely a personality characteristic of mine, and it served me well because it gives me the opportunity to get along with people I might not ordinarily get along with. Not if I judge them, not if I don't care what they think. And I've learned that you have to go underneath all the politics to find out what people's real values are, that the politics are incredibly distracting.
I
It's
agree.
like Mets versus Yankees. It's like, who fucking cares?
Right, right.
You know?
I've actually been a sports guy most of my life, and I've always had this fantasy that if the greatest problems that could ever happen between people is on that level, like is it the Yankees or the Red Sox? If that's where the so-called heartful tribalism could be, then that would be the world I want to live in. I mean, we're
Uh,
but not beyond that.
well, that's because you're a Dan Rudyard fan. You would act it out in a ritualized format rather than murder people. We
Right.
don't, we don't need the people in where Queens, where the Mets come from, to kill the people in the Bronx. Let's just have a
But
game.
if you go back prior to the current era, Eris, for example, was not about killing anyone. It was about counting coup. So basically you would go into battle with someone, and then if you touch them in a vital spot, that's all you had to do. Then the battle was over because you got them. So it was a game.
That's
It
like
was
summer camp. It's like capture the flag.
yeah, exactly. Right. It degenerated after that, of course.
It did. Well,
When
I
it
think greed got in the way. I think.
um, did you want to talk about the eclipses?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I was trying to weave that into the flat Earth. I mean, because if there's an eclipse object, it sure acts a lot like the moon.
Yeah, of course.
That's That's the answer to the what's an eclipse. Well, it's not the moon, it's the eclipse object. And I'm thinking, oh, it has like a
Well, there was
28
there
day
there was
cycle.
there was a recent thing that, because I communicate with Brett about this all the time, and in all honesty, he would really be the one to have a more technical conversation about the flat Earth thing, because he's spent as much time as you talking to the flat Earth people. But what I want to say is that when we were preparing our cosmology event, and I was bringing up this remarkable feature about the sun and the moon from the perspective of an Earth observer, being the same size, and there's no other place in the known universe where such a phenomena happens. That I first became aware of that in the 1980s through this really interesting article that came out and said, it pointed it out for the first time, and it said, this is proof the whole thing is a setup. And so then they were going into this whole thing. It was, of course, pulled into that orbit by some, earlier form of human, some earlier lost civilization. Um, but no, I look at it as more the element of the cosmology of this actual planet. It's a natural phenomena, which is why we have two sexes, why we have how we have about the polarity and duality and the whole thing that we do. We have yin yang, all of that comes directly from the cosmology itself. But at any rate, there's this short video that came out that shows all the different ways you can see eclipses in the solar system. And the only way you can ever get anything similar to what we can see on our planet's surface is from a satellite, right?
Mhm.
So or from different space missions and whatever. And so that he was like showing, and this is for you flat earthers, and it showed the curved disk of the moon across, sorry, the curved disk of the Earth across the moon. So basically from space, so you actually can see the eclipse and the track of the Earth across the moon from a satellite, and you can actually see the whole curve. So anyway, that was his dig at it. Of course, I'm sure the flat earthers have a response to that, but and anyway, just was interesting that came out in that video that was like proving the whole situation. There's no other place like Earth in our solar system, and so far
Mhm.
the other planetary systems that have been seen where you
Yep.
have this exact phenomena.
Yep. Well, exoplanetary exploration is largely theoretical, and I don't think they're down to satellites of planets. They're still having to use inferences to
Mm-hmm.
infer the existence of the planets. I watched the whole lecture series on it, and I thought it was quite interesting because I wanted to know how they were. I knew approximately how they were thinking, but I wanted to see the experimental data points and the methodology. But there was a story from 1941 by Asimov called Nightfall. Do you know this
Mm.
one?
I don't know that one. I
It's
know
a
Asimov, but not
multi-sun
that one.
system. It's a multi-sun. It's only a couple of thousand words. It's a multi-sun system, and periodically every century or so, all the suns line up and they're eclipsed,
That's it.
and it's always light on this planet, except for one total eclipse
Mhm.
that happens every I don't know how many centuries, but and they know it's going to happen every time. The side is going to just completely fall apart, and the premise is so simple.
Well, there's a similar. I was really into science fiction for a long period of time, and I was a huge fan of the Darkover universe, Marion Zimmer Bradley's Darkover universe, and it's the same issue. We basically have different moons, and there's different parts of the Earth that planet that are line up with different moon systems, and it creates the whole cosmology of that particular planet. A very very worthy series.
Okay, so let's look at from that viewpoint. The cosmology translated into some kind of a spiritual influence. How
Yeah,
how are you reading this? And by the way, have you caught that the new moon is
it's the
hold
North
on, let
Node.
me find the new moon is here's the chart that I used for my reading series. Check that out.
Oh yeah, we just
1924.
oh yeah,
At
This is
maximum intensity over Mexico, it's off by a couple of arc minutes. Still, that's astounding. And when you cast for the new moon, you get a to the arc minute conjunction with this little shitter that's only been in its orbit for 7 centuries, according to Dieter Koch. You can't really go back on Chiron
Mhm.
placement before 1300 or something. I mean, that alone is astounding.
Yeah, and then the fact that it's happening within the U.S. Chiron return, fifth Chiron return, but the exactness of that is completely off the scales of any probability, and it's also a north node eclipse, and I make a distinction between north node eclipses and south node
So,
eclipses.
what is that distinction?
Oh, I just think there's more, quote, shadow in a south node one. It requires more looking into the whole lineage and past of both an individual and a culture and a time period.
Mm-hmm.
I think the north node eclipses, you can't ignore the shadow. You can't light polarize it, but it's still more likely to be a point of seeding something in the future. You know, because I look at a north node with any planet or with like certainly a new moon, is to be a seed of at least till the next eclipse season, and certainly for at least 3 years, maybe even more. You
Yeah.
know, so it's like a punching ahead as relative to working with the shadow material that was there before, rather than having less of an option to punch into a future perspective when it's a south node eclipse, particularly south node eclipses that are lunar eclipses, you know, which are probably the most challenging of all the eclipses.
South node lunar eclipses. Yep.
Right.
Yep. I mean, lunar eclipses are underrated, and we're about to have a south node lunar eclipse on the 25th.
But it's a penumbral, you know, so it's the nodes are 10 degrees from the syzygy, so it's not as exact, but it's still not. It's still in an eclipse season, you know, so it's worth noting. But I personally have been an eclipse junkie my whole life, you know, so I try to. I if I make it to Ohio, if something major doesn't happen to prevent travel or whatever, I will have experienced directly all four of them, the four tracks that have gone across continental U.S., three of which enter continental U.S. just off of the Oregon, California coast. You know, so these four, I'm talking about the annular eclipse tracks, and I'm talking about the solar eclipse tracks.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, Very important for this time.
Yep. So you're going to Ohio to see the eclipse?
Yeah,
Right.
because that one of our school members has been doing extensive research into the mounds there, you know, the Hopewell Mounds, and that the whole area where she lives and where we're going to have the event is surrounded. And we're only like about 10 minutes from Serpent Mound, for example. We'll be watching the eclipse from the top of Miamisburg Mound. And the whole thing is built into our work on the synodic cycles of the moon and Venus, Mars, and Mercury. It also turns out that the day before the eclipse is the moon Venus conjunction, just before the moon disappears into the
That's an
underworld.
eclipse also.
Yeah, it is. It's an occultation. Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's impressive. And I've forgotten to mention that. I mentioned it, I think, in a couple of my Eye of the Centaur readings, but I have not written about it yet, which means that basically it means that Venus is parallel the eclipse.
Hmm.
So Venus it's a form of a conjunction. A parallel is a form of a conjunction. So Venus is in the act of this thing.
Well, the cosmology we use is we relate the Venus cycle to what the Sumerians looked at 5,000 years ago. Except we're doing it every synodic cycle. So every 584-day cycle, we're doing it, while the Sumerians only did it every 8 years at the time when Venus rose as a morning star near their new year, which was the March equinox. But we do for every one of them now. And so this is where Venus is descending into the underworld, which is basically the time that Venus is on the exterior conjunction when it goes behind the sun.
Hmm.
That's the point of kind of the shamanic death and rebirth of Venus, and then you have the evening star Venus and another 7 or 8 Moon Venus conjunctions, and until it goes into the interior underworld, and then shapeshifts into the next version of the sacred feminine at that point.
All right, so but look at all this Aries. I mean, what would you say? I mean, there's not a lot of people I can ask, but look at this.
Yeah, it's you combine that with the other stuff happening in April. In fact, it's the main feature of the seminar that we're doing in our school in about 10 days. You know, at the equinox. You have the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction also in April, as well as the Venus entering into the underworld in April.
Mhm.
What do I make of it? Um, I'm suggesting, and I'm not the only one who's saying this, that it's another timeline split that's happening then. That the bifurcation becomes even more extreme. Even when I was in the U.S. twice in 2023, I was already seeing that. One of the things I am most grateful for actually is that the maybe 90% of the people in my school, as well as my clientele, are quite awake. I mean, they're all on. They figured it out. You know, so I hardly ever, the only time I ever ran into people that bought into uh, big pharma and everything else that's happened in the dark spell is when I was at the airports. Um, it's pretty interesting. So I think that the split becomes even more seen.
Yeah, I mean, and that's consistent with the late 60s split,
Yeah.
which was quite dramatic and largely forgotten history. We think the world's supposed to be this massive, festering cauldron of identity politics.
Hmm.
Where you claim your thing and you put on your badge, and everybody else isn't you, or isn't like you. It's quite frightening. I mean, uh, yeah.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the writer William Braden? He wrote a book.
Can you pull it back just a little bit? The A. No, I might have seen that. Sum it up for me, please.
Yeah, so he wrote that in 1970, and he basically was looking at, um, that was back then the age of Aquarius stuff was really modified by the fact that they really took seriously in my generation, Pluto and Leo, that autonomy and sovereignty was part of it. It wasn't this descent into collectivism in the hive mind. But anyway, he was writing this book where he saw that two things could happen with the quote age of Aquarius, and he was not over glamorizing it at all. And he said we could either go in the direction of what he called matrifocal humanism, or to go in the direction of technocracy. And he was really afraid it was going to go in the direction of technocracy, but he was really arguing for the fact that it should be matrifocal humanism, which was coming out of the idealism of the 60s, and which was tempered by Leo, by a sovereignty and autonomy, and not into this. I personally don't even think Aquarius is intended to be electricity waves. It's the water. It's the constellation. The age of Aquarius is about the constellation, which is water. And in the work of Robert Schoch recently is even suggesting that what actually is currently coming out of the water jar of the constellation is plasma. So to be able to say that it's just like electrical, technocracy version of stuff is just like a hijack. It's like trying to take the sign of Aquarius and making it the age of Aquarius, which is not really not the case. So I spent a lot of time looking at the hijack of Aquarius, the sign, by making it be the age of Aquarius, which is actually a constellation.
Yep. I mean, I look at the way. Well, I think that the waves can be anything that travels in waves.
It can be, yeah. So it's whatever you want to project onto it. but of the fact that it was originally a one of the big four, and it's the only part of the sky that really looks like water. There's drops of water like coming down out of the
Yeah, that
water.
whole region is the River of Night, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. Why does the? I mean, I know there's a mythological
Cetus.
reason.
Mhm.
Why does the sea goat have a tail? I mean,
Right.
because he would drown. He's got to swim.
Yeah, of course, coming out of the water. Yeah, and in fact, if you go even back further, the earliest Sumerians didn't even see it that way. They saw it as a boat.
Which Aquarius as a boat or Capricorn
That's
as a boat?
Capricorn, the goatfish, right?
Well,
It's a
that's a
boat.
pretty good metaphor for Capricorn, I think, as a structured vessel. I think that works pretty good. I will keep that in mind. Looking for metaphors. Um, you know, I think it's worth just commenting on the pattern formation quality of Aquarius. I mean, that before Saturn and Aquarius, Robert Hand and I talked on the phone. I think maybe the last time I talked to him, and he, we both agreed that that was one of the really great exaltations in all of astrology, Saturn and Aquarius. But as it turned out, we Saturn and Aquarius was the lockdown period. It too was hijacked as a totalitarian
Yes,
effort.
yes. I mean, when you put together the shadow of Capricorn and the shadow of Aquarius, it's and I'm just blown away by these individuals that still try to think, well, Pluto into Aquarius, oh, the Aquarian age. Come on, it's the shadow of Aquarius that we're
Yeah.
looking at,
That's a
not.
good title for an essay. Yeah. Well, I'm calling it the Aquarian era, and it's a kind of make or break point, I think. In a way, it's a large social test of whether we want to go the whether we want to summon up the individualistic spirit of Aquarius or knuckle under to the group tribal domination. And people seem to love to do that. I find it very disturbing how people throw money at liars because it gives them a sense of camaraderie. I mean, I find this just to be like,
But
you,
to see if you go back to my era, okay, in the 60s, and this is what I keep saying, that back then, the Pluto in Leo generation, which certainly had its own shadow, of course, but anytime we thought of the age of Aquarius back then, it included the sovereignty of the individual as part of it. So the two things were operating together.
yeah, yes,
And in 65, 66, 67, the whole thing was not to tribalize as everybody with long hair, although it did turn out like that. The original impulse is be yourself, be your archetype, be your own unique expression of who you are as an individual.
yeah.
And then when people started becoming whatever they wanted to be, anything that was against what the black and white generation was of our parents' generation. We just decided to do anything different than that. Then it became a style later on. That was the tendency to tribalize. But no, no, the original impulse was way more Leo than it was Aquarius.
Well, that's an integration of the two of the
Two, the
of the
two,
two
yeah,
signs.
yeah. You
So,
have to look at them both together.
so sticking with Aries, I mean, I'm kind of going on and on about the need to recomprehend the concept of self-actualization,
Yeah,
which was a thing in the era that you're talking about. People actually understood that. People were going to therapists. People were doing things to heal themselves and to not only assert but internally claim their individuality. Now, how
exactly.
long it lasted is another question, right? How you know was it successful in any way? I mean, the a lot of yippies became yuppies and joined Wall Street and so forth, but and I wish it was more than a transient experience.
I think it was a generational thing. I mean, that's why I do put a lot of good value into the fourth turning and saeculum ideas that you can go back to the previous awakening generations and you would have the same phenomena. And it was me becoming aware of that material that helped heal some of my own grief because I really thought that what we knew in the 60s would last. But no, it's just that there's always a counterattack by the next generation that comes in.
You mean Strauss and Howe generation theory?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Well, so You know, the
Not
way,
not Howe's. I'm not a fan of Howe, but I think Strauss was the actual genius behind that whole thesis.
okay. I mean, do you know David Arner? Did you ever run into David Arner?
No.
Astrologer connected to Project Hindsight. And he was one of the people who sat me down with a chart and showed me how to read it. Like basically he said, hello, this is an aspect structure. I had a few really good teachers back in that era. They just kind of flocked to me. It was really incredible. I mean, I could not go wrong with astrology teachers when I initially committed, including Lori Burnett from Nevada City,
Right.
95959. I had a lot of correspondence with 95959. And for my 60th birthday, by the way, she gave me one of the things I wanted the most in the world, which was a Nevada City Border Patrol button. I don't know if you remember those, but it was a guy with a crystal head, and it was patrol your own borders, police your own mind, the Nevada City Border Patrol. And on my birthday, I opened an envelope and I burst into laughter. So anyway,
Well,
um,
I told you before, I think I knew Lori. I mean, she actually
ah,
she
okay.
came she came and stayed at my house when I was living up in Sandpoint, Idaho. And in fact was actually working with me for a while and actually shows up in my seminars sometimes. So I know Lori. I know all the Jeff Green stories from that.
Yes, we have crossed this path before. So
Yeah.
yes, she was also one of the people who broke it down for me,
Hmm.
right? How to do this. She's like, read every progress chart. So she's just got me started reading the progress chart to every natal chart, and turned me on to Alice Bailey, and said, if you like Pluto, you'll love Chiron. And then, like, 6 months later, I'm in
Hmm.
Egypt with Barbara Hand Clow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I see.
So,
Oh,
skipping aside all the nostalgia, I mean, and this is certainly a fun conversation for nostalgia. We're looking at a North Node eclipse conjunct Chiron,
right.
and Chiron is the consummate individualist. The Maverick was the first keyword assigned to Chiron by its discoverer and astronomer, who was a friend to astrologers. He was friends with Zeinstein for his whole
Yeah.
life, since discovering Chiron, and they made the ephemeris up with help from Marsden and all that stuff. But he said this thing is a maverick, and that's why he named it Chiron. And so, do we have a moment where there is kind of like a potential moment of clarity around the need for recognizing your individual quest and your individual karma and making peace with that?
Well, I can share with you briefly what my own views about how I interpret it. And I'm definitely a Chironic individual myself.
I would
I was
say,
born with Mars and Scorpio conjunct Chiron. Mars and Scorpio conjunct Chiron.
I've got Mars and Pisces conjunct Chiron. So we're both Mars Chiron people,
Right.
both Mars Chiron men.
Mhm.
So I
And
define maleness my way. You define maleness your way, for
kind
real.
of like that, kind of like that. And my wife is actually Venus conjunct Chiron. So
Orgasmic fusion with the cosmos.
in Taurus
Said
actually,
Barbara Ah,
and mine is in Scorpio. Um, but I could tell you many stories about how I experienced that. I mean, like for example, uh, I was in a high school of 200 boys, and I was the second to last boy in the whole high school to have any growth. So there I was, almost 16 years old, before the goddess had granted me a sword, if I could put it that way. And so it actually produced a huge amount of vulnerability around that male issue. But it served me well later on, by understanding how that works, and to be able to teach parents about their children who don't mature fast, and things like that. And it was
mhm.
really, really important. So that kind of, you know, it my view on Chiron is that on an individual chart, it's not a wounder, definitely. It's simply, what it's doing is pointing out where the fracture point is. And then it's teaching, giving a teaching about how you can heal that and integrate that and have that become your medicine. Um, so Mars and Scorpio has definitely been my medicine, and without any question, because of a certain fracture point that is unique to me. And I've seen that whenever the Chiron position is really close, with like a conjunction, or very, very exact aspect. Now, as far as the culture would be associated with that, when Chiron is in its by sign, just as like I look at Pluto by sign as pointing out where the shadow of the sign is, but with Chiron, it's where's the fracture point of that sign, and how can you learn from having it pointed out? Because I don't like that wounded thing part, but if I say fracture point, most of them are just the usual suspects, unless you have a unique one, like violation, betrayal, separation,
Mm.
lack of self-love. I mean, all what happens is when immortal becomes mortal, where basically you separate from unity, and then there's that really deep pain that if you go into deep healing work, which I think you have done yourself, is that there's that huge, if you go really deeply into the heart wound, it's in the back of the heart, and that's at that moment when the soul is separated from unity, when you come into birth, and that's probably the most difficult of all the traumas to have to integrate. So I think Chiron is really important on that level. It's pointing out where the uniqueness is. In your case, also, I mean, geez, Pisces, Mars, conjunct Chiron. I
On
don't
the mid
care.
on the midheaven.
Yeah, I don't care what political persuasion. I mean, you automatically have an awareness of where the grief and suffering in humanity is, and
Hmm.
that includes the animals and the plants and everything.
Hmm. Yeah. So let's say that the eclipse is sorry, not Mars yet. Though Mars is very active in this eclipse chart,
Yeah,
conjunct Saturn. The
yeah,
ruler of the eclipse is conjunct Saturn.
yes.
That's worth pointing out. I don't think I mentioned that yet. So let me show you how that looks.
Yeah, yeah,
Eclipse is
I've looked at it many times.
yeah, no, I'm talking to the
Ah,
we're not alone right now. It seems
wait a
like
minute. Wait a minute. Is this on video also?
no, we're video recording. It's a
Oh,
Zoom meeting.
I thought this was just okay. All right. I thought this was, well, gee, I certainly was, you rascal. Certainly wasn't prepared for that. So I've got my King Crimson T-shirt on.
Yes, baby. Okay, so um all this activity in Aries
Yeah.
is said to be ruled by Mars. So it's the Mars is the dispositor. Is that what it's called? Mars is the dispositor.
Well, our school doesn't even use rulership, but
Okay, but let's pretend. Let's go back to the bullshit rulership system. So Mars is connected to this eclipse because it's the ruler of all these planets. But look at Mars pushing into a conjunction with Saturn
yeah.
for this. So this is another picture of the transformation of the
Yeah,
eclipse.
yes.
Venus is involved because Venus gets eclipsed the day before. But what I just thought of when you were talking about the back of the chakra and the point of fracture, what the eclipse has in common is that all things solar and all things lunar are equally conjunct Chiron,
Mhm.
and that we don't need to claim a special class of wounded victims, which is very much the spirit of contemporary feminism. These days, that all men are toxic wounders and all women are toxically wounded,
I
and
know.
this is quite a meme that is caught on, and I think is looking for an opportunity to be reevaluated and reconsidered.
I
So
agree.
we have right.
I have so many clients that have been wounded by that approach, men and women. It's just the victimization of that judgment is so overwhelming. The only thing I can tell you is it does not show up in countries other than the uh, Five Eyes or crown colonies or whatever, however you want to look at it. It's not an issue. That whole gender kind of thing and transhumanism and all the rest of it doesn't show up in these other. I'm over in the Philippines. They won't have anything of it.
Yeah. Well, I was in Koh Samui, and the men were men and the women were women, and everybody seemed happy to be what they were, and no one. Well, the culture leaned much more toward the feminine generally, I thought. In other words, gentle. What you think of as the feminine, anywhere but the United States.
Exactly.
You think of
I
it
know.
more
I know.
feline. Everybody seemed feline.
Was
In,
I have a huge thing in our school regarding the hijack of the word gender,
mm,
because actually that word was up until the early 70s was never used the way it is today, ever. It was used specifically for grammar. And then when it wasn't used for grammar, the word was simply used as its real definition, which is what a culture says a man or a woman should be. And it was never used in combination with the word sex, ever.
I've looked
That
up the etymology of that, and it seems to be early 20th century. And I have a theory about that, but not the prevalence. I agree with the prevalence that you're saying gender, le, la, that kind of thing. Um,
Yeah, but also hey, I was there in 1970, 1969, 71 at the gay liberation. I mean, I had friends of mine that were being taught by guys that you cannot even have a relationship with a woman until you have one with a man. And this was very prevalent at that time period. And plus, I was very much involved with the it's so funny, Eric, how many of the mythic astrologers that brought mythology into astrology were gay men, and so many of them actually ended up of dying of AIDS. I was actually one of my closest friends was Tony Joseph, who I was there actually right before he died, and he was brilliant, bringing the remythologizing of astrology. I mean, he was a Hillman guy. And anyway, what I'm trying to get at is that it was way different back then. The necessity to bring the feminine into the astrological canon, because it was, to me, Hellenistic astrology. I mean, the whole Hellenistic culture is about as patriarchal as it gets. There are hundreds of years where women didn't even have names in that particular culture. So to be able to get beyond those traditional meanings that come from Ptolemy's time is very, very important. And that's what was the importance of the 1970s was, to bring that back into astrology. Now, in my opinion, it's just the aberration is so extreme. 72 gender. Come on. I mean, it's basically it's all got to start from your XX or your XY. There's men and women, and then you can choose to be whatever version of you wanted.
yeah,
Even in Aboriginal culture, they said always 1/12 of the population would choose the same sex. That was just a natural thing, but
yeah.
that was not an elimination of men and women. The perversion of puberty blockers or you know choosing to castrate or whatever. I mean, it's just absurd. There's no way we would ever imagine that back in the 70s.
But
To me, that's why.
this is all public relations agency stuff. I mean, my observation, having covered and lived through many of these, fraudulent movements, is this is astroturfing. This is not the look. I mean, I'm looking at the gender bender from 1977, popularized with reference to pop star David Bowie. So I've always
Indeed.
thought of myself as a gender bender. I am very much a man, but someone will, no doubt on BitChute, someone will post a thing. Those guys are dudes? Question mark. Okay. But this whole 72 genders, whatever the fuck it is, and puberty
Mhm.
blockers and kids having sex change operations, this I think is all public relations. This is all public relations. This is all brainwashing,
Yeah, it is.
capitalizing on the digital environment, polarizing people intensely,
Indeed.
radically. Okay, so eclipse in Aries, eclipse in Aries. Is there a possibility that there is some reclaiming of the masculine here as
Well,
something
there's
other than an offense, a wanted poster?
well, the way that we've been explaining it in our seminars is that what the chironic placement in Aries is doing is pointing out where there has been patriarchal toxic masculinity, the war aspect of it. I've been a huge fan of Hillman's last book, A Terrible Love of War, an incredible book, actually. The hijack of the original Ares god by the monotheistic religions, and but anyway, that's a whole other story. I think that what it's designed to do, and even Saturn, Mars, and Pisces as being part of it, is to actually show that there's other ways of being Aries. There's other ways of being Pisces. There's a full spectrum of the strength of masculinity. I generally use Jung's definition of masculinity.
Hmm.
And his definition was to know your sword and to know how to use it. But he wasn't talking about sword fighting. It was like, what is it archetypally that will get a man hard, if we could put it that way? All right. So Mars in Cancer, it's because he's a wonderful provider of nourishment, which is different than Mars in Aries, or different than Mars in Taurus, or different than Mars in Pisces. These are different ways that a man comes into the strength of what it is to be a man.
Okay,
He's
so we've
not.
got this big thing in Aries, but Mars is in
I,
Pisces with Saturn, which a lot of people say this is a masculine energy. I think that Saturn is equally maternal. That I think it's.
I agree.
I agree with Isabel Hickey, who first pointed that out to me. A great humanistic astrologer herself, I think.
Oh,
Who
sure. No, I know her about quite a lot, and I agree. I mean, that's one of the main features in our school is that Saturn has been hijacked. It's like it's originally the more the elder aspect of the feminine, actually. And actually, you've heard that story, I think, probably about Galileo, what he wrote in his journal when he first saw the rings.
tell me?
He wrote down in his journal, "Oh
She
my
has a
God,
dress. She's wearing a skirt.
no! Oh my God, the old man has a beard."
Ah, ah.
That's an example of how the brainwashing operated, you see. I'm not making it up.
I got it backwards. Oh my God, the lady's wearing a skirt. That's a damn nice skirt.
Agreed.
Those Saturnian
Agreed. Right,
rings.
right.
Boy, if I
That's
had to
more
pick.
likely it happened today. So okay, but back to Saturn, to Mars and Pisces. Uh, if it is the patriarchal father judgmental superego version of Saturn, it's trying to shut down the natural tendency of Pisces to be open-hearted. And like too much. The reason Aries could be such a great warrior, that even like Sekhmet, an Aries goddess, could the only way they could get her off the battlefield was to get her drunk. They had to get her into her feeling function. So basically, if Aries actually had an open-heartedness to realize, to be able to feel into where the suffering was, then Mars wouldn't be so, so the way that we perceive it often in patriarchy.
Yep. Yeah, and my Mars and Pisces conjunct Chiron, those descriptions of how all men are,
Mhm.
I find to be completely confounding. I'm like, does anyone have any clue, especially young men, that young men are kind of a lot like young girls in a way, and open and sensitive, and
Mhm.
especially
Yeah,
now. So, okay, so
we certainly agree on that.
yeah, I think, and look, there are machoer than macho boys, but I find the younger men are, to me, the easier they are to get along with.
I've seen women more macho than the average male.
It's kind of crazy. Yes, I had someone corresponding with me with one of those email accounts where you couldn't tell if they were a man or a woman, and it seems very I always think, well, they're hiding something. They don't want to be known. It's like these Facebook pages where they don't have a single photo of themselves. It's all butterflies and flowers.
Indeed.
And she was kind of being pushy in a way that reminded me of many disrespectful male readers.
Mhm.
Let's put
Mhm.
it that way. And I called her bro. Turns out. So there's a little teeny link on the bottom of her emails. It's like kind of half an inch. And I clicked on it. Oh, she's an artist. She lives in New York City. And then she says later, and don't call me bro. I'm like, listen, I didn't say, listen, bro. You're hiding. You didn't even tell me your name. I don't have any way to possibly know who you are. And I know a lot of women who don't like to be pigeonholed as women right away. And there's a store right across the street where you can be a woman and get a suit and tie. It's called he, she, or something like that. So this gender bendy thing's been going on. But just to sort out that thing, let's see. My take is that yes, it's out of grammar and it means sect. Basically, it means division. It means genus, gender, genus, same idea.
Right.
From
Okay.
pyroot, gene, even though pyroots may be complete bullshit, to give birth, to beget. But my sense is that the word sex became bad because people understood that sex didn't just mean male or female. Sex meant like
Right.
nasty,
Well,
very
probably.
nasty. And then in the early 20th century, people start substituting male or female sex is actually tested in English from 15th century. Took on erotic qualities in the 20th century. Gender came to be the usual English word for sex of a human being in the 20th century when it was first regarded as colloquial or humorous. Humorous. I'd like to hear a joke.
What you're looking at is not research I saw. I was looking into the history of the early 70s of feminist writers that talked about this a lot, and that all through the middle of the 70s, they would a woman who would write about gender then shifted to sex, and then the next one would say sex and shifted to gender.
Yeah.
Most of the research that I've looked at is that up until the late 60s, gender was primarily something that had to do with the categories of grammar. And in fact, what I love, the thing I love about English is that it's not there. All
Not
these
so much. No.
words,
Yeah, not
not
so.
so much.
I'm reading from the online etymology dictionary by Douglas Harper, which I
Mhm.
love, but I also have spent enough time corresponding with Douglas to know how he thinks and what he feels his mission is. And I had my most salient exercise in learning etymology from the etymology of the word Salacia. Because when I was starting to delineate the minor planets, Salacia, I wanted to go into the whole history of the use of the word, and
Yeah,
there's no way to connect the word Salacia with salacious. It may be, but etymologically, the word history is not there. So etymology is really a history of
yeah,
how when the word surfaces, and it's
right.
kind of a usage history of the word. And really, let's pause. That's
It, no,
fantastic
I love that too. I
conversation
mean,
to have.
in fact, one of the conversations just happened recently was the etymology of the word romantic,
Mm.
which is quite a bit different than the way that we normally think of it today. It had to do originally with like dramatic and heroic, as opposed to anything having to do with
Yeah.
uh, I'm going to send you flowers or something like that.
Well, 1650s of the nature of literary romance, partaking in heroic or the marvelous.
Mhm.
From the French romantique, pertaining to romance, from romant, a romance, an oblique case variant of Old French romans, verse narrative. See romance. Characterized by poetic or inspiring scenery,
Mhm.
as opposed to classical. This is Pirsig, the classic and the romantic, right? He
Yeah,
like
right.
the
That's
first
that
100
doesn't
pages
happen
of Glenn and
later.
the Art of
Right,
Vote is
right.
like
So you have the
this.
very dry intellectual classical music, and then you come in with the romanticism
Yes,
of that other that of the Russian
move to tears. Now, Rudyard's compositions, I have not heard of them, but I've been told they lean toward the classic
they do.
rather than the romantic.
Not that they're not romantic.
Yeah. Okay, but his astrology is arguably romantic.
I would agree.
He's so passionate about how wonderful Pluto is going to be. He kind of misses. I read one of his early pieces. I picked up a astrology magazine from the 60s in a kind of the breach of a bookstore a couple of years ago. And anyway, so
Yes.
the ideal love affair is romantic, such as literary romances. So it's got a lot to do with bookishness and the stories told in books.
So the reason I was looking into it and talking about it is because we were having this seminar, about a video blog, about the sexual styles of different archetypes, including
Mm.
foreplay of different archetypes. And so I'm asking the
Mm.
woman that I'm doing the video blog with, and I said, well, serious question. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. What does you've used the expression romantic several times.
What do you mean?
What do you mean by that? And so then we got into that, right?
So, what's the foreplay style of Mars and Pisces?
The joke about that is, you're with your lover and you say, well, tell me, how was it for me?
Mars and that wouldn't be Mars and Aries.
No, Pisces. I'm talking about Pisces.
Hmm.
So basically you're merging with the experience of the other person. So
Okay.
you basically just surrender into their experience. It's like I was having this conversation back in the day, because I used to be the court astrologer in different tantra organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this whole debate that was happening between Mars and Scorpio and Mars and Pisces. And the person with Mars and Pisces says, well, I just want to come many times, many times. Well, Mars and Scorpio says, no, what you do is you develop the capacity to hold it as long as possible. And then it becomes this, magic performance that happens at that point. It becomes sex. Well, then Pisces says, no, just many, it doesn't matter, just come over and over and over again. So that was the debate that was happening at that point. But it's like that, the difference between the Taurian approach, where Taurus, Aphrodite, is with her lover and she's looking at herself in the mirror. She's assuming the person she's with is having a good time, but the experience is for her. Well, Pisces, it's like, I'm really concerned about your experience. In fact, I will sacrifice my own experience so that you have a good one.
Mm-hmm.
That's just start. That's just
Mm-hmm.
start.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're going with it. Um, that it's well, I think that Mars describes the desire nature, which would qualify Mars by sign as describing the desire nature.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the way I look at Venus and Mars is on a man's chart. You could apply that. You can put the expression to Mars. How does he want to be valued? In the same way, a woman's Venus. How does she want to be valued? So you value her by that archetype, and that's something way more than some sort of cultural definition of man or
Yeah.
woman.
Yeah, though I'll tell you with Mars on my midheaven conjunct Chiron, I do want to be valued as valiant, but not at the war.
Well, no, I mean, and
I want to be
actually,
home. That's
your right livelihood is you want to be valued for your compassion and to be able to look at things in a much broader way than uh, what the mainstream would say, or what what the powers that shouldn't be would see it. So
hmm
you're pointing out where the actual reality people's lives are.
Yep.
That's the vertical value as opposed to what happens with the horizontal value in a personal relationship. So Mars would want to be valued by archetype relative to what they're doing in the world, but that'd be different than how they want to be valued in a personal relationship.
Interesting. Interesting. All right. So where does this leave us? We've got
Yeah, I wanted to just mention, if in case you did not know this, that the four tracks of the eclipses, and I do pay a lot of attention to the places on the planet where the actual track
well, the
is.
two total solars. There's a crossover point.
with the two, well, I consider the annular eclipses to be every bit as important. I mean, they're every bit as exact as a total. It's just the moon doesn't quite cover the sun, but
Yeah.
it's a direct, exact syzygy
Yeah.
point. Um, if you look at all four tracks, you know what they actually create? If you look at it, they actually create the Masonic logo.
Which is the, oh, it's
Yeah, exactly.
this thing
Yeah, right.
with a G in the middle.
Without, yeah, but that I haven't looked at that, but there was something I just saw yesterday that the current track of this one, actually the one that, you know, through Texas up through, you know, the Midwest and up through Nova Scotia, actually goes over 7 towns in America named Salem, which is pretty bizarre.
Huh. And I don't know the origin of that word. I'm etymology is one of my
Me
hobbies. Is
too.
I sit here writing all day. Etymology of Salem. Hebrew and Arabic bears the meaning peaceful, safe, complete, perfect. It's a biblical place name that refers to Jerusalem. Huh.
Well, the most recent connotation is, of course, about witch burnings.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, but
Yeah.
that's a but multiple sources are saying peaceful and complete.
Hmm,
Shalom. It's a epithet of shalom. It's a way to say shalom.
hmm. Wow. Wow.
Salim, Salim, complete, perfect, safe. And then historically was used as the name of a location. So as the location would seem to
Mhm.
suggest a refuge.
Hmm, hmm.
And so, you know, bad things happen there in the United States.
Well, I don't know if you the previous one, the annular eclipse that was happening in October. Um, uh, we had an event in New Mexico for that, and our goal was to go to the center line, which was just a few miles from Corona, New Mexico.
Yes. Yeah.
And, and we
Well, it's
did.
right near, that's Roswell. The ship
Yeah,
actually crashed in Corona.
I know. That's why we went there. So
You're the
we
only
did.
person who knows that besides me and a couple of ufologists out there.
Yeah, well, we went there specifically, and you know, and we were we went past, you know, where the Trinity site was, and we were driving there, and we went right directly at the point when when the partial started, just as we entered into that zone, and we got to Corona about half an hour before the exact thing, and we went out onto this land. It was 7,000 feet high there. I mean, it was actually colder than we thought it was going to be, and we were there under it. And boy, what that day was just so bizarre, because for hours before it happened, the amount of geoengineering was
Oh
just off the
shit.
scales. But right at the time period when the eclipse was happening, it all just cleared out, and
Yeah.
we had this absolute perfect experience of the ring.
Yeah.
And
I've heard this a lot of times from eclipse chasers. Do not be deterred if it's pouring fucking rain.
mhm,
Go to where you're supposed to be for the eclipse.
mhm.
And sometimes the sky opens up.
Well, I was in Oregon for the one in 2017, and then I saw the annular in 2012 in the Vermilion Hills in northwest Arizona, and then the one in Corona, and then the Ohio one. So I'll have all four of them. You know, I did see a total eclipse, total solar in Bolivia back in the 1900s on the Altiplano. That was a very intriguing experience. That one. Um, but yeah, I hope I get all four in, because every one of these we do ceremony at. You know, I mean,
Sure.
just I think somebody's got to be able to do what you can to help to be the best possible outcome and least amount of suffering.
Hmm. Yeah. Yes.
It's like my deeper fear about I mean, is a possible scenario when you're looking at Saturn with Mars and Pisces, and I run with Aries is that for sure people, the most likely thing for people's hearts to open is when there's just unbelievable, overwhelming tragedies.
Doesn't work.
Hmm?
Doesn't work.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so.
Even the ones that go through it?
Maybe, but
That's what I'm referring to. I mean, the ones that have to go through it. I don't mean, do we get a lesson from the Holocaust? I don't mean that, but it's like the people who actually go through the war or go through the suffering.
well, how many people who lived through 9/11 in New York City came out more loving for it? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of rage and jingoism,
Mhm.
um, and a lot of them got sick.
Mhm.
A lot of them got sick. There was so much asbestos and dioxin. So I have never.
I don't have a complete. I think it's a worthy inquiry, just to ask about that.
I've always asked about it. I've always tried to notice because I've done so damn much astrology of tragedies, as a mundane astrologer, and I'm always looking for points of opening, and the point of opening can't just be a local thing. I mean, suddenly we're all, if there's some mass shooting at the Bataclan in Paris, we're all there all of a sudden. We all have our eyes ripped out of our head and brought to the scene of the tragedy. TV doesn't really deliver it to us. It kind of delivers us to it,
Mhm.
I think. And there has to be a more gentle approach. I think that, I mean, my metaphor for this is the discovery of QB1, 1992 QB1, which was the first object ever discovered beyond Pluto in our solar system.
Mhm.
Have you heard any of this? Do you know any of this?
Some. Go ahead.
These scientists who were just kind of, they had extra telescope time up on Mauna Kea. How do you pronounce that? And
Mauna Kea.
Mauna Kea, yeah. Jane and Dave, a grad student and a professor, and they spotted this thing on the Eris point. But by the way, if you look at the discovery chart for QB1, later became called Albion. They found for a quarter century. Dave said, "Well, if I don't name it, somebody else is." So I take Albion as a deer medicine type of energy, a luring, a gentle invitation to growth rather than the Pluto form of growth, which is
Mhm.
grow or die.
Mhm.
That's the Pluto form of growth.
Compost.
Yeah, or the backed against the wall. Well, okay, I'll make a decision. If you put it that way, I'll be compassionate kind of view of
The only way to transform is the dark night of the soul.
yeah, but I'm suggesting that
Yeah, I
QB1,
hear you.
the advent of QB1, not only the dark night of the soul, that's one thing. I mean being enforced growth,
Mhm.
the grow or die. Dark night of the soul is you're going to go through that process. And my take on QB1 was this is beyond Pluto. We do not need to go through Holocaust after Holocaust after Holocaust, which nobody learns from. I mean, and evidently, the Jewish race didn't learn much from the Holocaust. If you look at how many of them are openly calling for Holocaust in Gaza as if it was some
Uh,
ritual sacrifice.
I know.
Um, so my theoretical analysis of QB1 was that it presents a concept of growth that is not Plutonian grow or die growth, but it's something else.
I hope so. I mean, that's what I said. My fear is that would be like the final version of that. I mean, I'll have to.
Keep
I
going.
mean, you know what I mean.
Final.
I mean, the final version of it. When we did our ceremony at Corona for that third eclipse, the
Mm-hmm.
third of the four tracks,
Mm-hmm.
basically, we each made like a certain declaration, a certain statement, as part of the ceremony. And what I said was that somehow the whole philosophy of 13,000 years, or I don't know how many thousands of years of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, has to come to an end. There's
Yeah.
no other way to go forward into another epoch if that continues.
Yeah. Yeah. Particularly with the level of weaponry that we have now and the the annihilation power that we have now, which were previously attributed only to the gods, and now suddenly, we've got them.
Yeah.
Ordinary mortal men. Uh, you know, uh, and another interesting topic of psyop is that this whole nuclear bomb thing doesn't exist. Uh, I agree. There's problems with the Trinity test photos. I
Hmm.
mean, and I've got the Trinity test range on the wall of my counseling room. Nobody knows what it is, but my friend Neil went to White Sands and took photos. It just looks like pictures of the desert.
Well, there's actually that very unusual and out of nowhere Thomas Cowan
Oh, please do tell.
no, it was all about that the Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not nuclear. That the books that are out there that are exposing that as being an elaborate hoax, that it was actually a seeded conventional. They knew how to make it look like that.
Yeah,
That information is out there. It's quite intriguing. But that his view, what he was presenting in that interview, not interview, that his
kind of a
podcast,
lecture. Yeah.
um, was that actually they can actually make the explosion. You just can't deliver it. In other words, there's too many things that have to go correct in an enclosed area. And even then, it doesn't always work. But if you try to transport it on a plane or on a missile or
Yeah.
whatever, it's just impossible to get it to
Well, if
work.
you look at Ivy Mike, if you look at the apparatus used for the Ivy Mike test, the first hydrogen bomb, it was almost contained in a warehouse.
Yes, yes. And the tests that were in the bikini area, and those all the French ones and the American ones, none of them were dropped. Those
Yeah.
were contained in one
Yeah.
area.
Yeah, so I think that I'm familiar with the book American Ground Zero, which is the story of the atomic blasts in the Nevada area, Utah, and so forth,
Right.
and New Mexico. I think that those likely happened because of how sick people got with radiation poisoning.
Mhm.
But again, they were not transported; they were not dropped. They make it seem like you really can fit it in a suitcase,
Mhm.
and I would say, well, show me that.
Well, that,
Let
that
me
was
see
actually
that.
the point of that whole interview that he
Okay,
did.
so he's saying that they can do the nuclear detonation, but it's not like a transistor radio, basically.
It can't be delivered. There's too many things that have to go right to cause both versions of it. Whether it's fission or fusion to happen.
Okay, that's a version of that I can live with.
Hmm. Hmm.
That does not seem like my first response is no, you're just an illogical, stupid fuck, and your problem is that you just never learned how to think. That actually contains some thought. And I saw, I've got a great nuclear file. Like I have done a lot of work on the nuclear axis chart. That fucking thing is real. That thing is a highly sensitive chart, but
Yeah.
it too was a stationary event in
Indeed.
Chicago under a stadium.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
was not, but it was, of course, the first atomic pile experiment. But and it's a heck of a chart, but it's very sensitive, and so therefore I've looked up all of the details on these early nuclear tests and the nuclear accidents. The chart is highly sensitive to nuclear accidents.
Hmm.
Do you need to wind up, or are you getting interview fatigue?
Yeah. No, very shortly. Yes. Yes. So, did we? And if you wanted to, here's what my recommendation would be: to do the best possible show on the flat Earth stuff.
Yeah.
I would invite. I think would have be great to have you and Gemini Bread and me on the same show.
let's do it because I'm not interested in the technical aspects of what they're saying. They're completely full of shit. I'm looking at because the sun didn't just disappear because it was too small, but then it rose. And you're in the Philippines?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. But the digital angle, I think, is fantastic. That, of course, the Earth is flat. I promise you, I don't have oh, here. The Earth is flat. Can I get this into the picture? Okay, here, I've got another one. The Earth is flat if you put it in one of these things. Red Goat 2. It's one of my backup drives.
Well, that's this whole situation, the way that David Icke explained it, he said that okay, and I hate the use of the word simulation, but he basically said if the universe we're in is a hologram on a certain level, all holograms start flat, and then everything comes from that. So that's the way he gets. People say, "Oh, he's a flat Earth." He's not. But he was describing how you could get really confused by the whole thing by the fact that a hologram starts out flat and then everything comes from that.
Yeah, and there's a digital issue, and I think there's a physical space issue. I've never heard a flat Earth conversation happening outside. I've never heard a flat Earth conversation happening beneath an eclipse. I think there's a certain lack of awe and respect for the magnificence of the physical plane, the beautiful elegance of the seasons pulsating from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere. I mean, everything is just so beautiful.
Yeah.
The way this works.
Of course, and the thing about Brett is that he basically even has taken it even further than I did in the 80s and 90s. Of he won a, I don't know if you know, he won a nebula, whatever that's
Science
worth.
fiction award.
No, not a nebula. Sorry, the thing that they give out in the astrology community. What do they call that? They call that a regulus. A regulus. Sorry, a
Oh,
regulus,
really?
because of his work of bringing astronomy to astrologers.
Well,
And he.
please let's set it up. Please let's set it up because one of my themes, and it's a centaur theme, is the healing of astronomy and astrology. The
That's what both of us are heavily into.
I
And
mean, Zane Stein really got a long way with that by being friends with Brian Marsden and Chuck Kowal. He got
right.
the ephemeris from Marsden and was friends with Kowal for the rest of his life after the discovery of Chiron. I managed to get a lot of astrophysicists on the program. I've had Brent Tully, great attractor. I've interviewed Jane Liu a couple of times, who discovered QB1. I've interviewed briefly, but still, Dave Jewett, and recently I had Alan Stern on the show, who led the mission to Pluto.
Yeah, I
Uh,
saw that. Saw that. Yeah.
what a badass! And like,
Mm.
God, this guy's intense and he's hard headed. And then I read about what he had to go through to have that, and I wrote to him. I said, "Geez, if you weren't so
Mm.
focused,
Mm.
that fucking thing never would have gotten to
Right.
Pluto."
Amazing. Mm.
You know,
So we could have a great conversation along those lines. And
okay, because I think it's a spiritual issue fundamentally. I think that it has nothing to do with the shape of the planet. I think it's got to do with how shocked and confused people are, and spiritually detached and looking for meaning. I mean, right, leave it there.
yeah, I
Looking for
agree.
meaning. Okay, so we've got a big motherfucking Aries eclipse coming up with Mars in Pisces conjunct Saturn. So I can, now that we've talked this through, which is really, I haven't had a chance to talk it through yet. I mean, I've been lecturing on it for months and months. I've done like easily 30 hours of talks and recent readings. But this opens up the whole gender question. And look, before we go, P.S., one last thing is this Eris conjunction to Mercury, only 3 arc minutes. This is a very important part of this eclipse.
Yeah, I know.
I think this is a reclaiming of a reclaiming of Eris as whole maker and not fragmenter, with inherently gender neutral Mercury,
right.
In retrograde,
Yeah.
saying search within for that aspect of you that doesn't need all of that.
The way that I've always looked at Eris, is, and we always do this in our school, we always invite her into the circle. She
Mm.
only she's only problematic because if she's not invited.
Yeah.
And and otherwise what you get is the shadow. I look at Eris as being kind of a combination at its Gemini and Scorpio, okay? And and so if you imagine she's pissed off because she's not invited in, she can really be a troublemaker. But for the
Yeah.
most part, she's attempting to move things along, to move things forward. And as an agent, it kind of reminds me relative to the Aries thing. Um, there's this really, really powerful point in I think it's the second of the Batman trilogy movies. All right, the one that has the Joker, or is that the second one or the third? Okay, and it's where Ares, like a kind of a modern version of Ares or a more advanced version of Ares, the Batman says the Joker cannot win. But see, if you look at the Joker in that movie, it's intentionally setting chaos, which is really different than what the evolutionary purpose of chaos is. So it's important for there to be chaos sometimes, but not intentional chaos. And
Yeah.
that's what I think that Eris is imparting to the this retrograde point, because I mean the next overstory for for Mercury is Aries, and that is I'm sorry, is yes, is Aries. So I mean each of the three Mercury cycles is going to be, each year has a certain specific sign that becomes its overstory, and it's been Sagittarius. The next one is Aries. So that's what. So Eris is hugely important. Thank you for pointing that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been looking at that retrograde Mercury leaning right into that Eris, and just, well, yes, inviting that whole thing into the into the circle, and
Mhm.
we have to heal this darkness and fragmentation,
We do.
and we're not going to do it fighting each other out in the streets.
No, I'm certain that 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 would be part of another conversation. But if we took this in terms of like the political scene, I'm convinced the whole thing itself is a psyop designed in order to create, some kind of a civil war,
Yeah.
designed to create that. No matter which of the two sides end up. I mean, it's just so stupid that people give their power away to that.
Yeah, and we could look at why that is. I mean, you really sidestep a lot of deep personal material. You give yourself a pass to not work it out,
Because part
basically.
of it is about wanting heroes, and the other is the same thing we talked about before about the fate of America as being divided up into these two parties, and they keep flipping back and forth.
Yeah,
So great,
sad to say.
nice conversation with you, and I'll tell Gemini Brett that we'll do that talk at some point. Okay.
The sooner the better. I
All right.
think it would be eagerly welcomed by a lot of people who are looking for a civilized, coherent conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, in my conversations with flat earthers, all I'm really doing is demonstrating tolerance and listening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's my only point in doing it, is to model that,
Right.
right? Because I mean, no one's going to convince anybody of anything.
Right. I know.
In that particular, but you can teach a level of friendship by showing that it's possible that people who seem to have opposing views can have a fun 3-hour conversation, hypnotized by a little graph of the sun going in circles over the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Giamario,
Manage la miseria.
this has been great fun. No, what does it mean?
That was something my dad would say all the time. Managela. And that's more like so much grief in the current situation. It's like he would always say that all the kind of a frustration kind of thing, but it was still a funny thing. It's like I thought it was a very Scorpio. He had Mars in Scorpio also,
Yeah.
it's a very scorpionic thing to say. Managela. Anyway. See
Yes,
ya.
sir. An honor.
Bye.
A pleasure. Yeah, bye for now.